Hello everyone, Charles2 here, and today I'm going to discuss Jordan Peterson's view of self-interest. Now, at least one other objectivist, Jerome Brooke, has commented on this clip, but I have some original things to say on it, or at least I have had original things to say on it. Whenever you speak extemporaneously, you are at the mercy of your subconscious, so it's a little bit of a gamble. And your subconscious often has a way of not feeding you the best material when it actually matters. So we'll see if this works out. In any case, I'm going to watch this and comment on it as I go. So let's hear what Jordan Peterson has to say.
What is your view on psychological egoism? If we're all ultimately acting out of self-interest, then does altruism have any merit? I don't think the question's well posed. And it's one of those questions that leads into a philosophical dead end because it's not well posed. There isn't any such thing as self-interest. It's not the right way to think about it because you're not alone. And so this is why I like Piaget, Jean Piaget, because he thought about this intelligently. Look, first of all, whose self-interest do you mean? Do you mean your immediate self-interest in the next second? So that would be impulsive pleasure. We're all acting for the gaining of impulsive pleasure and to hell with everything else. Well, obviously that's a stupid way to behave and everyone knows that because you can do it.
All right, already there is no such thing as short-term self-interest. There is no such thing as short-term self-interest. Self-interest means the interest of yourself, and you don't exist in the short term. You exist in the long term. Long term is defined as your whole lifespan. That's what we mean when we say long term. It's not some absolute measurement. It's not like long term means 100 years. Long term means the whole span of your life. There's no such thing as short term self-interest. There's no in temporal terms. In the same way, there's no such thing as short space self-interest in physical terms. You don't say, well, is it in my narrow spatial self-interest to get a hand massage while the rest of my body is being cut with razor blades? I mean, look, that's my spatial self-interest, right? No, that's stupid. Because you are your whole self. You're not just your hand. It is just as stupid to talk about short-term temporal self-interest. Well, it's in my self-interest right now to eat this cake and break my diet or whatever it is. No, you are you across the whole time span that you exist. So it's just as stupid to slice one little piece of that off and say, well, this is my self-interest here. No, it's not. Because yourself is yourself across all of the time and space that yourself occupies. So just keep in mind how stupid this sounds once you make this spatial, and then recognize that it's exactly the same thing.
Do impulsive, short-term gratifying things like snort cocaine now, and you can keep doing that, and it'll pay off real well in the extremely short term, and it'll just auger you into the ground in the medium to long term. So if you're acting in your own self-interest, let's take that apart. Over what period of time?
Over the period of time that yourself exists. This is not difficult, Jordan. You exist across a certain period of time, and as a whole entity, your self-interest is what benefits you overall in space and time. You can't just say, well, there are different moments of your life, there are different parts of your body, therefore there's no such thing as self-interest because you can define it as any one of these. No. You mean maximizing across the entire thing. It's not a choice of, well, I either choose this slice of time or this slice of time. You don't have to set them against each other. The question is, what maximizes your happiness over the whole period of time that you exist? That's an objective question. It's not something where you have to set up an impossible choice. Well, do I value my happiness now or do I value my happiness then? Who can say? No, it's I value the maximum amount of happiness. I mean, you can make this financial. It's like, well, do I value $5 now or $100 10 days from now? Well, all things being equal, this isn't just a matter of, well, do I value now or then? No, it's I value the maximum amount of money, let's say. And so then the choice is easy. This is not difficult.
Your self-interest in the next second? Your self-interest in the next hour? Like if you're impulsive and you want to gratify an impulse, you're obviously acting in your self-interest in the next second, or the next 2 seconds, or the next minute. But you'll pay for that. Maybe you punch someone or you slap someone because you're so angry, and they knock you for a loop, and then they charge you with assault. So, well, it was great in your self-interest in the second, but like future, remember that Simpsons episode? Homer drank a quart of mayonnaise and vodka, and Marge and all his kids were telling him not to. And he said, well, that's a problem for future Homer. I sure don't envy that guy. It's like, which is one of the best Simpsons lines ever, I think. And well, that's it exactly. It's like, well, there isn't just you. There's now you, and there's tonight you, and there's tomorrow morning you. That's the one that'll have the hangover, by the way. And there's next week you, and next month you, and next year you, and old you.
I just want to point out that that joke is funny because people understand that Jordan Peterson is wrong about this. The point of that joke is that Homer is stupid and that he's the same person across time. That's why the joke is funny. The joke is funny because people see so clearly that what Jordan Peterson is saying doesn't make sense. There's not future you and now you. It's just you. Your consciousness is an enduring, stable, mental entity equivalent. I don't know if entity is the right word, but I mean, it's immaterial, so it can be confusing if you use certain terms and you don't clarify with a whole paragraph. People will misunderstand. But anyway, it's an enduring thing across time. And everybody understands this. That's why that joke is funny, because Homer is the same person in the future that he is now. It's the same consciousness experiencing both states. The joke is funny because Jordan Peterson is wrong, so it's bizarre of him to say how much he loves that joke.
You. And so if you're going to act in your self-interest, you have to take that collective of yous across time into account when you make your decision. And now here's the cool thing about that. So then let's say, well, that would be acting in your self-interest, writ large, right, across time spans. But the thing is, future you and someone else that you have to live with right now that's not you are pretty much the same people. And so if you're going to act in your self-interest and you have other people around you, then you also want to act in their self-interest, because otherwise they won't like you. They won't cooperate with you.
Wrong. 100% wrong. Profoundly wrong. That is... Okay. So other people are exactly to you as future you is to you. Well, you can introspect and see if you agree with this idea based on considering the following thing. Let's say you have some kind of disease. I don't know, arm cancer. I don't know if that's real, but for some reason you have to get your arm amputated. Okay. Now, would you get your arm amputated if not doing so would cause you to die? I would. No, I mean, I'm not talking about they saw it off without anesthetic. I'm talking about you get an operation, they put you to sleep, you lose your arm, but you survive. Would you give up your arm in order to continue living? I would. Would you give up your arm to save the life of an acquaintance? I would not. Now, even if you would, because you're altruistic, again, we're talking about an acquaintance, not your wife or somebody. Your arm means more to you than the life of some random person. But even if you would, you can still introspectively see the difference. Now, if you wouldn't, it's even clearer. Now, why would you give up your arm for future you if you wouldn't give it up for your acquaintance, your roommate, whatever Jordan Peterson's example just was, it's because you are future you. And you're not your roommate. Future you is not the same thing as other people. And all you have to think is, well, there are all kinds of things you do because of how they affect future you that you would not do for other people. And the reason is that future you is you in the future. It's not the same thing as other people. It's in your self-interest to invest now for your future benefit. It is not in your self-interest to invest for somebody else's benefit that has nothing to do with you. So these are not the same thing at all.
With you, and they won't compete with you in a reasonable manner. And so that's going to be a catastrophe. And so you want to act out what's good for you now and what's good for you next month and next year. And you want to do that in a way that's good for you and your family and your community right now, next week, and next year. And you're going to take all those things into account at the same time. That's an equilibrated game from a Piagetian perspective. And it was his idea that that constituted the basis for proper moral judgment. And it's a brilliant idea. It's a brilliant idea. And so that's your true self-interest. There's no difference between your interest and the interest of others. Not in any fundamental sense. Even your enemies, which is why you're enjoined to treat your enemy as if he was yourself. Because he is.
Okay. So, this is why I really wanted to do this clip. Here is the whole trick behind what Jordan Peterson is doing. And I don't know if I'll have a lot more to talk about after this. We're not even halfway through the video. But Jordan Peterson's whole trick to justifying altruism is this idea. Here's what he's doing. Well, let me start out with the actual way to think about things. Now, there are no conflicts of interest among men. There are no conflicts of interest. What's in your interest cannot conflict with what's in somebody else's actual interest. Now, he can have values that are irrational, and in that delimited way contradict your interest. I believe Ayn Rand says the interests of rational men don't conflict, but really the interests of men don't conflict. Because the interests of men are the same whether they're rational or irrational in fundamental terms. But interests don't conflict. Why? Because your interests are based on facts about what's good for you. So if you go and pursue your self-interest and you come into superficial conflict with somebody who's pursuing his own self-interest, the classic example of two people applying for the same job, right? Your interests conflict, right? No. If he gets the job and you don't, that's not a conflict of interest, because it's in your interest for him to get the job if he deserves it. For multiple reasons. One, because that benefits you, that better people, the best people are getting jobs, which produces more wealth for you. And also because if you trick him or, I don't know, break his legs and throw him in a closet and tie him up to make him, not show up for the interview and you get the job, you're violating his rights, which is bad for you. Your interests don't conflict because your interests are based on fact, and facts don't conflict. Now that only works because you are starting with your factual requirements for you as an individual. This doesn't work in reverse, and that is exactly what Jordan Peterson is trying to do. What Jordan Peterson is trying to do is say, he's taking this idea, look, there are no conflicts of interest. That's true, but then he's trying to reason in reverse to derive self-interest from altruism. His view is, well, look, interests don't conflict. So if you're selfish, that doesn't conflict with somebody else's interests. Okay, that's true. And so he says, therefore, you can go and figure out what other people want or need, sacrifice for them, do what they want, which is in their interest, and therefore that must necessarily be in your interest, because interests don't conflict. So if you do something for somebody else, in somebody else's interest, it must redound to you, because everybody's interest is really the same. So you can go and do good for other people, and that's really in your own self-interest, because interests don't conflict. This is how he's justifying altruism. But you can't actually do that. You can't derive your own self-interest based on what other people want, because your interest has to be based on facts about what's good for you, not about other people's emotions or desires. Desires can conflict. So if you just go look for what other people want, and then you say, well, I'm going to appease that, and that must be good for me because it's in his interest, and what's in his interest can't be in conflict with what's in my interest. Yes, if you base your interest on fact, not on subjective desire. I mean, you can think of this in concrete terms. Think of this in terms of being in a relationship. You and your girlfriend want to go to the movies. And this would be the rational thing to do. Well, I want to see this, you want to see this, we'll take turns. Something like that. No, you say, no, I'm not going to take turns. I'm not going to assert my interest and then see what's in her interest and understand that what's in both of our interest is mutual satisfaction. No, I'm going to see what's in her interest. We're going to go see what she wants to see every time. And then because that's in her interest, it must be in my interest too. Well, you know that's not going to work. Why? Because you're not asserting your self-interest. You have to do that first. Asserting your interest is a prerequisite for interests not to conflict. You can't just think, what does she want? I'm not going to assert myself. I'm not going to think about what I want. I'm going to be a nothing. And then figure out what's in my interest just by derivation of whatever she wants. No, that doesn't work. Because what's in her interest is for you to do what's in your interest. These are facts, and they don't conflict. But if you conceive of self-interest in this way Jordan Peterson is, and then you steal this premise of interest not conflicting, which seems plausible because it's true, but then you apply it in this wrong way, then you justify altruism because you say, hey, look, altruism's in your self-interest. There's no difference between egoism and altruism because interests don't conflict, so how could there be any difference? If you're altruistic, that's acting in somebody else's interest, and that must mean it's in your interest. But you know that's wrong. Just remember that concrete of deciding what movie you want to see. It's always good to keep a concrete in mind. I try to do this with all my videos. Come up with these concretes that you can just always refer to when you get lost in the abstractions. That's a perfect concrete. Just always remember that example and you will not have problems with this trick Jordan Peterson's trying to pull.
You know, when you think, well, you should wish well, you should wish your enemies well. Well, why? Well, it isn't that you hope they get a bigger house than you. It's that, let's say you're being pursued and tormented by someone who's truly reprehensible. That person they have a miserable life, man, in all likelihood. Let's say they're truly malevolent. You know, they live in hell. And what you might hope for them is that they could figure out how to get out of there, because it's not good for them and it's not good for anyone else. Think, well, even your enemies, it's like, wouldn't it be good if they could get their act together and stop being so unnecessarily malevolent? And that's in your self-interest. So the idea that your self-interest is somehow opposed to other people's, or that if you maximize your self-interest, you're not operating in the best interests of other people, is predicated on a poor idea of what constitutes your self-interest. Because you're not separate in any real sense from other people. You're maybe not separate from everything in some real sense. You know, I mean, Jung in his book Mysterium Conjunctionis, he had this idea. I'm going to go through it real quick. It's a complicated idea. That this is how you put yourself together. The first thing you do is you join your emotions and your rationality, so that your mind and your emotions are one thing. He called that the first conjunction. So that your motivations and your emotions and the way that you think about the world are all acting in the same direction. Okay, so that's the first conjunction, and you get your act together that way. So that would mean incorporation of aggression and sexuality from a Freudian perspective. Those parts of you that are difficult to integrate come to be integrated into one thing. So you can use your anger when you need to, and you have your sexuality under control. It doesn't have you, but you know how to use it, and it's a power for you. And you're properly assertive in all of those things. And so you build yourself into one psychological unit, and then you embody that. So that's the second conjunction. The second conjunction is take your mind, emotion, motivation, unity, and act it out. Act it out in the world, so that there's no distinction between you and what you do, between you and the way you think about the world and your philosophy and how you act. That makes you a second kind of unity. And then the final conjunction, which is the most difficult one, is to stop thinking that the world is different than you are. This is why I ask people to clean up their rooms. It's like, your room is you. It's you. And so you go in there and you clean up your room. You're cleaning you up too, the same way. You're developing discipline. You're putting yourself in order. You're developing a vision of the future. You're figuring out how to dress. You're figuring out how to take care of your...
You know, just as a break from all of this BS, I will try to extract out from this something valuable. And here's something you can keep in mind. Here's a valuable little tidbit. What is common among mystics, like Jordan Peterson and the Orientals he worships, is this idea of taking a real phenomenon and then taking the principle embodied in it, or turning it kind of abstract analogy of it into a metaphysical truth. So a lot of Eastern religions, like Taoism, are based on this idea of the flow. Now, as a metaphysical statement, it is totally false. Now, it's based on the actual fact about how the subconscious works. Yes, the subconscious does act in a way that they were clearly trying to get at or basing their metaphysics on. But you can't derive metaphysics from how the subconscious works. They just take one aspect of reality and then say, ooh, there must be some spooky principle embodied in here, and they turn it into a whole metaphysics. That's exactly what Jordan Peterson is doing here. Yeah, cleaning up your room is psychologically helpful. Living in an orderly space helps you feel better psychologically. That's true. That doesn't say anything metaphysically about whether you are your room or anything like that. I should plug Aristotle here. This is actually something from, I can't remember if it's Zeno or Melissus. One of Parmenides' students made this argument that there really is no separation between things. All things are really one. Because if there's no such thing as empty space, everything's touching. And if everything's touching, how can they be different? If two things are touching, they have to be the same entity, right? Aristotle has a whole explanation of why that's not true. And I can't remember precisely what he says, but in any case, the truth is that no, touching something doesn't make you it. It really boils down to ease of separation. An entity is something that is glued together, right? It's something that moves as a unit, as one, right? If I touch my hand to the wall, that doesn't make me the wall. I am not my room because I'm touching it. Why? Because I can easily separate away. I can move as an entity separately from my room. I am different from my room, metaphysically. But things that move together, glued, and it really is that literal, by the way. That's what makes something an entity. I believe Ayn Rand discusses this in the appendix to Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, 2nd edition, where they have the workshops, her epistemology workshops, some edited transcripts of those. And she says, no, literally, if you have a bundle of sticks or something like that. That's not exactly what she says. You have a bundle of sticks. Are those an entity? No. If you literally take some glue and glue them together, that makes them an entity. So don't think I'm being esoteric or anything here. No, being an entity means being connected, moving around. Now, yes, the universe is a plenum. There's no empty space. Everything is touching something else. That doesn't mean everything is one. That doesn't mean there's no such thing as entities. Because it's all about what coheres and moves as a unit. Anyway, there's some actual metaphysics that addresses what Jordan Peterson is saying to the extent it can be addressed, because he's not really saying anything. This is just vague mumbo jumbo. So hopefully we're almost done with this video. So even if it's just more nonsense, then it won't last too long.
Things. You're interacting with the microcosmos that you have in front of you and learning how to balance chaos and order. There's no difference between you and what's around you. And that's a very difficult thing to understand. And so you want to act in a way that's good for you, but good for everything else at the same time. And that's a high moral virtue. And that's the right way of thinking about the relationship between psychological egoism and altruism. It's like as you move towards a broader conceptualization of things, you start to understand that
I'll just point out he didn't even address psychological egoism, by the way. None of this has anything to do with psychological egoism. I mean, has something to do in the broad sense that it's related to egoism, but he did not address the question at all. Psychological egoism is the question of, don't people automatically pursue pleasure? And it's based on a failure to distinguish the difference between motivation and self-interest, which I may have gone into that before. I have things to say about that are important. I know I've gone into it before, but I can't remember if I've said everything I have to say on that. It'll come out in an essay or book in some form at some point. But yeah, he didn't actually, all of this is not addressing the question, even aside from the nonsense. Even when he was talking in ways that could basically be understood, he didn't address the question at all. He didn't address, do people automatically pursue what's in their self-interest? That's actually the question. But he addressed the question of conflicts of interest. Is doing what's in your self-interest, does that go against doing things for other people? So
there is no selfish self-interest. It isn't how life works. Like if you're married to someone, for example, and you're stuck with them for the next 50 years, it's like you can't win an argument with them. You can make peace because they're you, man. They're you.
Oh, this is the other thing I wanted to say about the cash value of this idea of appeasing other people. It's his rat example. He always talks about rats, right? Oh, if the big rat wins a game too many times, they wrestle, they play together. If the big rat wins too many times, then the little rat won't play anymore. And see, so this shows. You have to go out and appease the little rat, do what's in its interest, and that's really in your interest. No. Again, he clearly means this to transfer into a human context. No, in a human context, what's in your self-interest, and if you keep winning against somebody else, it's not in his self-interest for you to let him win. That doesn't reflect the facts of reality. It's in both of your self-interest to do the best you can and let the best man win. So this shows in concrete terms exactly what he means by this. This is what he means. He means give up, sacrifice, let somebody win even if they don't deserve it. Be altruistic, sacrifice for other people, because that will help you because there's no conflicts of interest. But you can see why that's wrong. It's not in your interest to let somebody else win because he feels like he wants to. Your interest is not determined by your emotions or other people's emotions. You can't say, other people feel like this, therefore if I appease them, that's in their interest and therefore in my interest. That's the chain he's doing. It's in reverse, and it's based on emotions rather than facts. Based on consciousness rather than existence.
They're a huge part of your experience. You have to treat that person as if they are you. And that it's not It isn't like, well, I'm going to treat you well because you're me. It's because people don't treat themselves very well often. It's way more complicated than that. You don't want to defeat your wife, man, because then you live with a defeated wife. And if you think she isn't going to take revenge on you.
So you see now he can't well, whatever.
Then you're not very bright. So you want to listen to what she has to say, and you want to listen to her problems, and you want to help her solve them because she's you. And you want to do the same with your kids, and then you want to do the same with the people around you if you can do it. So the whole idea of like, well, we're basically wired to be selfish. Well, we are when we're not very wise and we act impulsively. But as your view of the world broadens, you start to understand that this is why in the Buddhist philosophy, Buddha attained nirvana. So that meant he could stay in union with the gods, so to speak. He attained the highest form of subjective experience, which might be something like total immersion in bliss and meaning. But he rejected it because he went back into the world to help other people attain nirvana, or at least to move towards it, because he realized that there was no individual redemption without the redemption of all. And if you don't understand that, then you're just not very wise. And so you're trying to be a force for good in the world. And that doesn't mean just good for you. It's just blind, because there isn't any isolated you. That isn't how things are. That isn't how reality lays itself out. So
okay, well, I think that will do it for this video. I think this video is relatively short, but I packed a lot in here. So next video I think will be on Sam Harris's moral landscape and what's right with it and what's wrong with it. So I will see you then. Bye.